the greatest detective novel in history, Sherlock Holmes.
The Adventure of the Beryl Coronet.
It was a bitterly cold February morning when Holmes received one of the most agitated clients I had ever seen cross our threshold. I had been warming myself by the fire at Baker Street, idly turning the pages of the morning paper, when the door was flung open and a tall, gaunt man entered, his face pale, his eyes wild, and his hands trembling as though gripped by fever. "Mr. Holmes, for heaven's sake, help me or I am ruined," he cried, before Mrs. Hudson could even announce him. Holmes rose at once, his expression calm but alert, and waved the man toward a chair. "Compose yourself, sir. You are among friends. Pray tell us your name and the nature of your difficulty." "I am Alexander Holder," he stammered, pulling off his gloves with shaking hands, "senior partner of Holder and Stevenson of Threadneedle Street. My position in the city is one of trust and responsibility, and yet I stand on the brink of ruin. It is all owing to this cursed coronet." He drew from a leather case a most extraordinary piece of jewelry, which he placed upon the table before us. Even I, who have little taste in such matters, could not fail to admire its craftsmanship. A delicate circlet of gold, set with 39 enormous beryl stones, glowing with a light like frozen fire. Holmes bent over it, his keen eyes glittering. "A remarkable piece indeed. Pray, continue." Holder wrung his hands. "It belongs to the highest nobility. The Prince Regent himself entrusted it to my keeping. He required an advance upon it, and as his banker I could not refuse. The sum was £50,000. I placed the coronet in my private safe at my home in Streatham. Last night—" His voice broke, and he pressed a hand to his brow. Holmes leaned forward. "Steady, Mr. Holder. Every detail, if you please." Holder nodded, breathing hard. "Last night I retired as usual. I had locked the coronet away, but anxiety gnawed at me. I could not sleep. At last I went down to the drawing-room where the safe is kept to reassure myself that it was secure. To my horror, I found the door open, the coronet upon the floor, twisted, 3 of its beryls snapped out. Watson, good heavens! Yes, Holder groaned, and worse still, my own son stood before me, the coronet in his hands. I started. Holmes remained still as stone. "You confronted him?" Holmes asked. "I did. He dropped it at once, swore he was innocent, and refused to explain. I sent for the police. He is now under arrest at Bow Street. My only son, Arthur, charged with theft, perhaps even treason, if this affair is not resolved. I cannot believe it, Mr. Holmes. He is hot-headed, reckless, but not a criminal. Yet who else could it have been? My household is above suspicion, my niece Mary, my servants, all faithful, and yet the coronet lies ruined, and the prince's wrath hangs over me." Holder covered his face with his hands, his whole body shaking. Holmes sat back, steepling his fingers, his gaze never leaving our client. "This is indeed a most serious affair. But take heart, Mr. Holder. Appearances can mislead. We must sift fact from assumption. Watson, we must see this house in Streatham at once." And so, with Holder leading the way, we prepared to step out into the frosty London morning, bound for the scene of this singular crime. The journey to Streatham was a somber one. Mr. Alexander Holder sat opposite us in the cab, his face drawn tight with misery. He scarcely spoke, except now and then to mutter some fresh self-reproach about his ruined honor or his disgraced name. Holmes, however, sat motionless, his long fingers steepled, his gaze fixed on some invisible point in the air. I knew from experience that this stillness was deceptive. His mind was racing, seizing on every scrap of information, weighing it against all he had learned of human nature. The frost had lain thick across the suburbs, and when we alighted, Holder's residence stood out against the pale winter light, a fine, solidly built house surrounded by well-kept gardens, now bare with the season. The banker ushered us inside, where the air was heavy with the silence of a household under disgrace. "My niece Mary," Holder said, his voice trembling slightly, "is upstairs. She has taken the matter most cruelly to heart. And the servants, well, they are honest folk, but none can be wholly trusted in such a time." Holmes inclined his head, scanning the hall with those sharp eyes of his. "We shall see everyone in due course, Mr. Holder, but first the scene of the crime." Holder led us into a large drawing room, richly furnished. Against one wall stood a stout iron safe, the door still ajar. Beside it, upon a small table, lay the coronet, twisted and broken, its gap where the 3 missing barrels should have been, glaring like a wound. Holmes stepped forward at once, his hands clasped behind his back. He circled the coronet, then bent low to examine the jagged edges where the gems had been snapped off. He said nothing, only pursed his lips and nodded slightly, as if confirming some private thought. "Watson," he said at last, "observe, this damage was done by brute force, not delicate extraction. Interesting." Holder wrung his hands. "But Holmes, my son was found holding it. What other explanation can there be?" Holmes turned, his voice calm but firm. "There is always another explanation, Mr. Holder. Our task is to find it." He then began his quiet but thorough inspection of the room. He moved to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. Frost still clung to the panes. He dropped to his knees, his nose nearly touching the carpet, where he scrutinized every inch. Suddenly, he stopped. "Ha-ha!" he murmured, drawing my attention to a faint scuff on the pile. "A footprint, Watson, a woman's by the shape and size, and fresh, too." Holder's brow furrowed. "A woman's? But my niece? Impossible." Holmes rose slowly. "Not impossible, only improbable, but it is a fact we must not dismiss." He examined the safe next, his long fingers tracing the scratches near the keyhole. "Tell me, Mr. Holder, who had keys to this safe?" "Only myself," Holder said. "Arthur knew where I kept them, but he did not possess one." Holmes tapped the iron door. "And yet, here it stands, opened with a key, not forced. Curious indeed." At that moment the door opened, and a young lady entered. She was pale and strikingly beautiful, with dark hair and large, sorrowful eyes. She glanced once at Holder, then lowered her gaze. "My niece Mary," the banker said softly. "She has been most distressed." Holmes bowed slightly. "Forgive this intrusion, Miss Holder, but you must see how vital it is to gather every fact. Did you hear anything in the night?" She shook her head. "Only my uncle moving about, as he sometimes does. I went to my window, but all seemed quiet. Arthur," she faltered, and tears filled her eyes. "Arthur is no thief, Mr. Holmes. I cannot believe it of him." Holmes studied her closely, his face unreadable. "Your loyalty does you credit, Miss Holder. Tell me, have you ever seen your cousin, Arthur, handle the coronet before?" "Never," she whispered. Holmes' gaze softened for a moment. "Thank you. That is all for now." She withdrew, casting one last anguished glance at her uncle. Holder groaned aloud once the door closed. "You see, even she cannot save him. My own flesh and blood brought to shame." Holmes ignored the outburst. He turned instead to the fireplace, where the ashes of last night's fire still smoldered faintly. With the poker, he stirred them gently, then bent to retrieve a half-burned scrap of paper. He examined it briefly, then tucked it into his pocket without a word. "Watson," he said at last, "our work here is done, for the moment. Mr. Holder, I must ask you to grant me patience. The truth is not yet ripe to be spoken, but believe me when I say that your son may yet be innocent." Holder looked at him with desperate hope. "You think so? Oh, Mr. Holmes, if you can save him—" Holmes cut him off with a raised hand. "Save your thanks until the facts speak for themselves. Come, Watson, we have much to investigate, and time grows short." And with that, we left the gloomy house in Streatham, the broken coronet still glimmering on the table, its missing stones a silent challenge. Holmes' long stride carried him quickly down the frosted path, his face alight with the thrill of the hunt. I followed, my mind swirling with unanswered questions. We left Mr. Holder's residence in the chill of the winter morning, the pale sun struggling to pierce the mist that clung low over the streets. Holmes strode quickly, his coat-tails flying behind him, his long strides forcing me to keep pace. He said nothing for several minutes, his keen gray eyes narrowed in thought, until at last he stopped abruptly at a corner and turned to me. "Watson," said he, "we are on the trail. The case is more intricate than at first sight, but its outline begins to clear. There is mischief here, yes, but also the unmistakable stamp of a woman's hand. Did you mark the footprint on the carpet, the faint scuff near the window? That is our first signpost." I nodded. "And the paper scrap in the ashes, Holmes? What of that?" He smiled faintly, patting his breast pocket where he had tucked it. "Ah, that is a seed, my dear fellow, which may yet bear fruit. But we must not scatter our conclusions too soon. First, I have a call to make." With that, he hailed a hansom cab, and we drove briskly into London proper. Holmes leaned forward, tapping the roof impatiently when traffic delayed us, but I knew better than to press him for answers. His silences were often more eloquent than words. At last we drew up before a modest lodging-house in one of the quieter streets near Marylebone. Holmes bounded up the steps and knocked smartly. A thin, sharp-eyed landlady answered, and at sight of Holmes her expression changed to one of wary recognition. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," she said, "you're here again. What is it you want of me now?" "Only information, Mrs. Morrison," Holmes replied smoothly. "A lady of your establishment, tall, dark-haired, with a proud bearing. Has she been lodging here of late?" The landlady sniffed. "And if she has?" Holmes leaned closer, his tone suddenly commanding. "She has been seen in connection with a matter of the gravest consequence. I advise you to answer plainly." The woman's eyes flickered, and after a pause she muttered, "She comes and goes, sir. Fine clothes, but restless. She was here only yesterday, before dusk." Holmes' eyes gleamed. "Excellent. And did she leave in company?" "With a gentleman," the woman admitted reluctantly. "Tall, fair, with a military look about him." Holmes exchanged a glance with me. "Watson, the pattern sharpens. Come, we must not tarry." We were back in the cab within moments, Holmes urging the driver toward the West End. Along the way, he drew the charred scrap of paper from his pocket and smoothed it carefully on his knee. Upon it, in faint ink, were the half-burned words, "Meet me at usual place. Do not fail." Holmes tapped the fragment with his long finger. "You see, Watson, an assignation, a meeting arranged in secrecy. Combine this with the feminine footprint and the report of our landlady, and it is clear as day. The coronet was not damaged by young Arthur's hands alone. He may have been present, yes, but there is another, Ah, a clever, dangerous woman at the heart of it. I could not help but protest. But Holmes, the banker himself, swore he found Arthur clutching the coronet. How else can that be explained? Holmes's lips curved into that thin, ironic smile of his. My dear fellow, have I not taught you that appearance is the most treacherous of witnesses? Imagine, if you will, Arthur, roused from sleep, hears stealthy sounds. He rushes down, finds someone tampering with the safe, and in the struggle, the coronet is bent. He seizes it, not as a thief, but as a defender. And then his father enters. To the banker's eyes, guilt appears undeniable. Yet what if Arthur's silence is not from guilt, but from honor, from a desire to shield another? I started. His cousin Mary? Holmes said nothing, only gave a grave nod. Our cab drew up before a smart hotel near Regent Street. Holmes leapt down and went directly to the desk, where he inquired after a certain name he had scribbled on a slip of paper. The clerk confirmed it with a stiff bow, and soon we were shown to a private sitting room, where, much to my astonishment, we found a strikingly elegant woman seated by the fire. She rose quickly, her eyes flashing as Holmes entered. "You have no right," she began, but Holmes raised a hand. "Madam," said he, "when a nation's security is compromised by the loss of property entrusted to the highest financial houses, all private rights give way. You know of what I speak, the coronet. Where are the missing beryls?" Her lips tightened, and she flung back her head with a proud gesture. "I know nothing of your accusations." Holmes regarded her steadily, his eyes cold as steel. "Then I must remind you that I hold a piece of your handwriting, scorched though it may be, which proves you arranged a meeting last night. With whom?" The woman's composure faltered for an instant. Her hands trembled slightly as she drew her shawl tighter about her shoulders. "You cannot prove it was I." Holmes smiled grimly. "On the contrary, I have already. But do not fear, I am not here to ruin you. I only require the truth." For several long moments, silence filled the room, broken only by the crackling of the fire. At last she spoke, her voice low. "I did meet someone, but I shall say no more. It is not I who should be questioned, Mr. Holmes, but another, a man whose position shields him from suspicion." Holmes's eyes flashed. "Ha, that confirms what I suspected. Come, Watson, we must not tarry." And with that, he swept from the room, leaving the lady trembling by the fire. Back in the cab, I could contain myself no longer. "Holmes, who is this man she hinted at?" Holmes leaned back, his hands steepled, his expression of grim satisfaction. "Patience, Watson. You will see all in good time. But mark me, this case is not merely about missing jewels. It is about pride, honor, and sacrifice. And before it ends, we shall see both villainy and nobility in strange company." Thus we sped back toward Streatham, the winter sun now fading into a dull gray sky, the coronet's mystery growing darker as even Holmes's certainty grew brighter. When we returned to Mr. Holder's home, dusk had already settled over Streatham. The banker greeted us with hollow eyes and trembling hands. The weight of disgrace and fear seemed to have aged him by 10 years in a single day. "Mr. Holmes," he cried, "have you discovered anything? Have you found the jewels? My reputation hangs by a thread. The loss will ruin me, utterly ruin me." Holmes placed a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "Take courage, Mr. Holder. I believe I hold the threads of this case quite firmly in hand. But before I can present the truth, I must ask you one thing. Will you trust my methods implicitly, even if they seem strange?" "Yes, yes, whatever you say, only save me from this nightmare." Holmes gave a brisk nod. "Then summon your son here at once. We must have all parties present before we can lay bare the matter." Arthur Holder was brought into the room. His face was pale, but his jaw was set with the same silent determination we had seen before. He stood tall, refusing to meet his father's eyes, his lips pressed tightly together. "Arthur," said Mr. Holder, his voice breaking, "for God's sake, speak the truth. If you did it, say so, and let me suffer the loss. But if you are innocent, why this silence?" The young man looked at him steadily, but said nothing. Holmes regarded him keenly. "Your silence is most telling, sir. It is not the silence of guilt. It is the silence of a man shielding another. I know whom you are protecting, Arthur Holder. It is your cousin, Mary." At the mention of her name, Arthur's eyes flashed, and he clenched his fists, but still he said not a word. Mr. Holder staggered back. "Mary? Impossible! She is as innocent as an angel." Holmes' voice was cool and precise. "On the contrary, Mr. Holder, your niece is the heart of this affair. The coronet was not damaged by your son's hand, but by hers, or more precisely, by the hand of the man with whom she has been in secret correspondence." I gasped. "The military-looking gentleman, Holmes?" "Exactly, Watson. Sir George Burnwell, a man of dissipated habits and the most unscrupulous character. He has preyed upon young women before. He saw in your niece a means to gain both wealth and amusement. She, in her foolish infatuation, admitted him into your house. It was he who seized the coronet. In the struggle with Arthur, who, to his credit, came down to protect the family honor, the precious ornament was bent." Mr. Holder sank into a chair, his face buried in his hands. "My God, Mary, my own sister's child!" Holmes continued, his tone softer now. "Arthur, being a man of honor, refused to betray her, even when his own liberty was at stake. He chose silence over dishonor. You misread the scene when you entered the room, Mr. Holder. You saw only your son with the coronet in his grasp, and assumed the worst." At this, Arthur finally spoke, his voice ringing with suppressed emotion. "I would never betray Mary, father. I found her with that villain Burnwell. I struggled to stop him. I swear I did not touch the jewels for myself." Mr. Holder sprang up, tears streaming down his face, and grasped his son's hands. "My boy, forgive me. Forgive your foolish father. I have wronged you cruelly." Holmes, ever practical, cleared his throat. "The matter of the missing stones remains. Burnwell has them. I traced him to a lodging and confirmed his presence with your niece, but the jewels themselves have already been disposed of. Burnwell is a cunning rogue. He has sold them off piecemeal, beyond recall." Mr. Holder groaned. "Then all is lost." "Not all," said Holmes firmly. "You still have your honor, your son's innocence, and the lesson, though harsh, that blind trust can lead to ruin. I regret that the coronet cannot be restored in full, but better to know the truth than to languish in false suspicion." Silence fell upon the room. Mr. Holder clasped his son to him, while tears coursed down his cheeks. The proud banker was humbled, broken, yet in some measure relieved. As for Holmes, he stood by the window gazing out into the winter night. His lean figure was outlined against the lamplight, his profile sharp and thoughtful. "Watson," he said at last, turning to me, "it is one of those cases where justice cannot wholly be served. The law cannot touch Burnwell. He will escape, as such rogues often do. Yet perhaps his punishment will come in another form. As for us, we have done what we could. The truth is revealed, and a good man's name is cleared. That must suffice." And with that, Holmes took up his coat and hat, and we stepped once more into the London night, leaving behind the sorrowful house and its shattered coronet, a reminder of how fragile both honor and trust can be.